you're all storytellers. You're already all storytellers. You're born storytellers. We've evolved as humans to tell stories. And it's one of the things that makes us human, which means that our brains are literally wired for storytelling. That's the first piece of good news, which I'm sure you all got from those answers. The second thing, which is another piece of good news, is that everything is a story. Everything. Stories are everywhere, which means that you don't have to look very far or very hard to find stories that are going to help you in your work and in your life. And so that includes your own story, right? The stories in your own life are going to help you in your work, in your projects. Another idea that I want to talk about a little bit is, about what connects story with sustainability. Storytelling is an endlessly renewable resource. It's one of those things that the more we do it, the more we have. And there aren't that many things. We're talking about sustainability. We often talk about preserving things and conserving things. But with storytelling, the more you have, the more you have. So that's an amazing resource for us. So the other thing about stories, and all of you know this, is that stories are powerful. They have the power to shape. They literally shape our world. They shape our own world, and they shape the whole world. Now, that's a good thing, and that can be a bad thing, too, especially in this internet age, right? Stories spread so fast now that they have more power than they ever have had in past generations, I think. So that means that we have a responsibility that goes along with storytelling, with being storytellers. So, but for our purposes, the good news is that power is something you can harness, right? To help you design your project and communicate your project. So let's talk about story at its most basic level. So at its most basic level, story is how we create meaning, right? We have events and perceptions and emotions that bombard us every day. And story is the frame we create to make sense of things that can seem random, right? We automatically, even unconsciously, ask questions to put things in an order, to determine what's important, who is involved, what are the stakes. We're always making up stories, right? So story is how we create meaning, and it's also how we communicate meaning. So I'm going to ask you guys, you can hold your questions. I promise you we'll definitely have time for questions. So don't worry about that. So story is how we engage with, influence, and change the world around us, which is another way that it is connected to sustainability and making positive social change, right? Because if we're influencing and changing the world with stories, and we're trying to make positive social change, then storytelling and positive social change are intimately connected. We can use storytelling to do that. And someone, who was it? I think it was Daniel. Yes, Daniel mentioned something very important about stories. They really help us with memory. They really help us with what he's called retention, right? So when you are trying to communicate your projects, you want people to remember your projects. So it's very useful to have a story that you're telling, right? To make your project into a story, because people will remember it. They'll retain the information better. So that's another way that as we're communicating meaning through storytelling, that's another fantastic effect that it has. Another way that storytelling and sustainability have a relationship is that they're both about connections, right? A couple of people made that point, that storytelling is about connecting. So it's about connecting a lot of things, though. It's about making connections for people between things that they might not have thought were connected, right? So you're telling a story, you connect things in the story that they might have not have thought are connected. So you're making connections in the story itself. And you're making a connection between people, right? So when you're communicating, you're trying to connect to your audience. A couple of you mentioned that. And connection is really what your projects, every single one of your projects, connection is what those projects are about at the end of the day, right? Because without connection, why do you have a project in the first place? So story is really going to help you achieve that. So some of you are probably trying to change the way people think about using resources or redistributing resources. But whatever your project turns out to be, you're going to need to make connections between people and ideas, or between people and resources, or between people and people, right? So story is going to help you do that. So let's get to our next question that I want to hear from you guys. What makes a good story in your minds? Let's hear about what makes a good story to you. So the elements of an effective story, especially in the context of sustainability leadership, the first and almost the most important thing is that people are at the heart of it. People are at the heart of a story that connects with people. So neuroscientists have even found that our brains respond more powerfully. They do these brain imaging things, right? They respond more powerfully to stories that have people in them. And so let me be clear. By people, we can mean any character that we personify, right? So sometimes, some of the best stories have animals, right? But we have personified them. We've made them feel like people to us. Okay, that's element number one. It has people at the heart of it. The second element of a powerful story with regards to sustainability leadership is emotion. People respond to emotion with emotion. So that's a huge range. That's an infinite range. Sorrow, joy, nostalgia, amusement, anger. You're trying to inspire emotion in people because, for one very important reason, because it's emotion that gets people to take action. People very rarely take action when it's just an intellectual exercise, right? They take action when they are, you know that expression, someone is moved to take action? If you're moved to take action, then you've been inspired by emotion. So the second element in a good story is emotion. Now, the third element is an interesting one, because I think that people who are newly thinking about storytelling sometimes get confused by this one. Specificity. Now, I remember, I used to be a touring songwriter back in the day. And when I first started writing songs, I tended to write these songs that were very general. They were because I thought that the more general the songs were, the more universal they would be, the more people would connect to them because I was speaking generally. Well, it turns out the exact opposite is true. The more specific you are about specific experiences, the specific things in your life, right? The specific things in the lives of the people, of the stakeholders in your project. So it's kind of a paradox. The more general a story is, the less relatable it is. It's kind of ironic. The more specific we get, the more universal it actually is. So the great news about that is that we don't live general lives. We live specific lives. And that's what other people connect with. Not the general, but the specific. So that's a great tip that I think that new storytellers tend to often get wrong, is they think they have to be very general about things in order to make people relate. Not so. You want to be specific. The fourth element in a good story, and this one is, it's true about most stories, but especially when we're talking about the story of your projects, a story that's about sustainability, is struggle. You don't go from, I am creating this project because, and the end of the project is everybody's happy and we're all fine. That's not a story. There has to be struggle to get in the middle, to get to the end. And that's what people relate to. I know that sometimes when, in the United States, there are a lot of self-help books out there, right? And people love to sort of read about how other people got through things. Now, it would be a very terrible self-help book if you opened the book and it said, I'm the happiest person in the world and you can be too, and I've always been happy, the end. That doesn't help us at all, right? What you're opening that book for is to hear about somebody else's struggle. So for many reasons. One is so that you don't feel so alone, because we're all struggling. And our struggle is what connects us. And the people that you are trying to connect to, the people who you are, quote unquote, selling your project to, the stakeholders in your project, you're trying to connect to their struggle. And the way you do that is with connecting with your own struggle so they can relate, right? So struggle, it's a super important part of when you're crafting your story. And then the final element, the fifth element, is hope. Because when you're trying to create social change, when you're trying to inspire people to act, you can't leave them with nothing. You can't leave them with the struggle. So there are two parts to hope, though. It's not enough to say, it's super hopeful. Now I've created this project, and if we do this project, then there'll be hope for our community. That's great, but it's not enough. People have to see an opening, an actual path forward, and a place for them in the story of your project, right? How are they a part of your project? How is the story of your project going to tell them that they have a place in it, that it represents them, it reflects them, and that they can be a part of it. They can contribute. So hope, it's a very small little 4-letter word, but there's a lot that's contained in it, especially with regards to storytelling. Because in the end, you're trying to get people to take action. You're not just trying to give them general hope, right? You're trying to give them specific hope. Again, we get back to specificity in storytelling. You're trying to give them specific hope that there is something that this project is going to do, not just to help them, but to help them help themselves, that they can take action. So those are the 5 elements with regards to sustainability, leadership, and storytelling. Those are the elements that make a good story. People at the heart of it, emotion, specificity, be specific, struggle, and hope. I think those are great elements for a story. And so I have a question. This is sort of here's a general question for you. So I assigned a film. Did anybody see how many of you, let's put it this way, facilitator, can you help me see how many people have already seen the film? And do be honest about this. It's okay if you haven't. I wasn't necessarily expecting you to, but I'm just curious if anybody has seen the film. How many of you have seen the film?
Hello. I think you could just indicate by raising your hand. The video has been uploaded on the landing page.
Okay, so if you could raise your hand, and don't raise your hand if you have questions. Right now, just raise your hand if you've seen the film. Okay, and can you tell me how many people roughly?
25.
25 people. Okay, out of how many?
Well, it's now up to 29. It's hit 30.
Okay.
Out of how many? To be fair to them, not all of them saw the.
That's absolutely fine. Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. No. This wasn't a test. I promise. This wasn't a test. The reason I'm asking is because I was wondering whether it was worth me asking the next question. And I think that 30 people,
yes,
I think that's worth it. I think it's worth to ask this next question. Okay, people, now you can put your hands down if from seeing the film. And so here's a question. Why did I assign that film? For those of you who saw it, and this will be useful for those of you who are about to see it. Why did I assign that film, do you think? Jimbo?
Yeah, I think we can go with Alina.
Hi, I'm Alina and I'm from Namibia. I watched the film. Yes, I watched the film just I think a few hours before the class, and I see why now that you have given us the important aspect of a good storytelling. I think it was an embodiment of all the 5 things. It was specific. It was speaking to gun violence. It was very emotional. Even without having lost someone to gun violence, I could almost feel their emotions, parents, relatives. So I think that's why you put that film there.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alina. Thank you so much. Okay, let's get somebody else. Kimbo, you're muted.
Okay, Fred, I think we can go with Fred.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm Fred. I'm from Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone, great. Fred, welcome.
Yeah, I think you shared with us the story, the movie particularly, for us to see a kind of well-documented, structured storytelling of the gun violence in the US, and it actually shows us how emotional the parents or the families were aggrieved of their loved ones. So I think it's a very good beginning that we can learn by several means, not only by reading, but we also learn by listening and watching. So I think we had a lot of insights from the movie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Fred. And can I just say, I love your sweatshirt, because UCSD, that, for those of you who don't know, that's the University of California at San Diego. And that San Diego is where I am right now. So, did you know that? Did you know that? Did you know I was in San Diego? Well, I love that. That's a beautiful coincidence, and that's another thing you should look for with storytelling. Always keep your eyes out for these little serendipity things, right? I love that. Thank you, Fred. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes. So the film, there's no spoilers here, right? With this film, we can talk about the film a little bit, even for those. It'll whet your appetite, I think, for seeing it if you haven't seen it. So the film, there are so many levels of storytelling in that film, right? So on one level, you have the film itself, right? The film is a medium for storytelling. So the film is telling the story of a specific project. So actually, it's kind of a great thing for you guys to see, because it's telling the story of a project. It's not the project itself; it's telling the story of a project. So I think that's very useful. And as I think it was Alina who said that it's an embodiment. That film is an embodiment of all of those 5 elements of what makes a good story, I think. It also, because the storytelling is happening on many levels, right? So you get to see so many things. You get to see different ways of communicating story. You see it in images. You hear it in sound. You see like creative, like you see it in artifacts. How we can tell a moving, powerful story, right? So I think it's both the project that the film is documenting. It's a beautiful project. It's an incredible project. And I really can't wait for the rest of you to see this film, because I think I challenge you not to be moved by this project. And I think the filmmaker did an excellent job of using all the elements of storytelling. And someone, who was it? Fred. Thank you so much for bringing up the idea of structured storytelling. So, and in this film in particular, the structured storytelling, it's beautiful because you see the structure of the film itself, but then you also see the structure of the project. And this project is specifically about telling the stories of victims of gun violence and their families, right? So it's so you see the structure happening on many levels. So I can't wait for the rest of you to see it. So as far as what Alina was saying about it being an embodiment, it taps into deep emotions, specific lives. It's a very wonderful way to see how specific lives actually inform good stories, and struggle. And you wouldn't think that there's any hope at the end of, a story about gun violence, but in fact, there is hope. The project itself and the film telling the story of the project give hope that really motivates. Like, I know the first time I saw that film, I thought, what can I do? Can I volunteer with this project? to hear people's stories about who they've lost. It really moved me in that way. And I think it'll move you too, those of you who haven't seen it. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. What makes a good storyteller in your minds?